are very beneficial. And then after discussing that, four Kumaras start saying, first in the verse number 20, they say attachment to the Lord's glorification cleanses the lusty desires. And then they say in verse number 21, the only cause of benefit or kshemaya hetu is detachment from the bodily concept and attachment to the Lord. And then there are three verses that two of them which we discussed, which tells about how one can be attached to the Lord and detached from the bodily concept of life. By having, there are some do's and don'ts that we discussed. And then after that, the four Kumaras, Sanat Kumara specifically says of them, that hearing gives attachment to the Lord and detachment from matter. Hearing about Krishna Katha in verse number 25. In verse number 26, he says, result of attachment to the Lord, what happens? One destroys one's subtle body. So we have a gross body that we can see, and there is a subtle body which is made up of mana, buddhi, ahankara, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So that is destroyed. All the impressions that we get is because of our subtle body, which is there from the past life. Most impressions are there, which are manifested in each birth we take. So once that subtle body is destroyed, it means one becomes very purified. His soul and body are non-different. They become on a very realized state. So he gives an example, just as fire arising from the wood burns the wood itself. So the fire coming from the wood, burning the wood, giving an example that the power of devotion, power of hearing, coming from within is actually destroying all the different anarthas which is in the body, and also destroying the subtle body. And then he describes the result of destruction of the subtle body. And in verse number 28 and 29, when he describes the effects of presence and absence of the subtle body. When there is presence of subtle body, one is an enjoyer due to desires, thinks of this world as objects of sense enjoyment and the results of happiness and distress. And when there is absence of subtle body, one sees Paramatma, one tries to fulfill the Lord's desires. One does not see any differences in terms of bodies. Right? So he develops an equanimous attitude. Then from 30 to 34, Kumara said, the attachment to sense gratification is the cause of the samsara. The samsara is going on because of the sense gratification. In the verse number 35, then he says that dharma, artha, kama, moksha is something which of the four purusharthas must be taken very seriously. The other three are all subject to destruction by death. It is there till the time a person is alive. Once he goes, those things are not there. So one should focus on moksha. And then it's in verse number 36, they say the Lord destroys all temporary goals. So he says that there is nothing auspicious for those whose goals will be destroyed by the Lord as time. Such temporary goals, higher or lower, exist only in relation to the material modes and nothing to do with the spiritual aspect. Then from 37, 38, again, there is a discussion about Bhakti Mishra Jnana with the predominance of Jnana and the goal of Sayujya Mukti. But after saying all this, understanding Prithu Maharaj's distaste of the words, so asmi, like having distaste there, Sanat Kumar now speaks about pure bhakti. So far he spoke about the path of bhakti mixed with jnana. Now he will explain pure bhakti, which is the best path. And this 39th verse is actually one of those verses. So let's discuss. Let's recite. Yat pada pankaja palasa vilasha bhaktya.
Yatpada pankaja palasha vilasa bhaktya.
Armashayam gratitam udgratayanti santaha.
Karmashayam gratitam udratayanti santa.
Manariktamatayo yatayo piruddha.
Tadvannariktamatayo yatayo piruddha.
गणास्तमरणं भज वासुदेवम्
श्रोतो गणास्तं मरणं भज वासुदेवम्
यत्पादपङ्कजपलासविलासभक्त्या
यत्पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
कल्माशयं ग्रथितं युद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
तद्वान्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
तत्त्वन्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
रोतो गणास्तमरणं भज वासुदेवम्
श्रोतो गणास्तमरणं भज वासुदेवम्
यत्पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
यत्पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
तद्वान्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
तद्वन्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
रोतो गणास्तमरणं भज वासुदेवम्
श्रोतो गणस्तमरणं भज वासुदेवम्
Thank you.
हरे कृष्ण प्रभु
Hare Krishna, please.
यत्पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
तद्वन्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
तद्वन्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
श्रोतो गणास्तं मरणं भज वासुदेवम्
रोतो गणास्तमरणं भज वासुदेवम्
थैंक यू प्रभु हरे कृष्ण
Thank you so much.
हरे कृष्ण प्रभु I can try.
Please.
यत्पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
यत्पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
तद्वन्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
तद्वन्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
रोतो गणास्तमरणं भज वासुदेवम्
श्रोतो गणास्तमरणं
भज वासुदेवम् हरे कृष्ण
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I can try. Yatpada pankaja palasha vilasa bhaktya
यत्पादपङ्कजपलाशविलासभक्त्या
karmashyam grathitam udgrathayanti santa
कर्माशयं ग्रथितम् उद्ग्रथयन्ति सन्तः
tadvanna rikta matayo yatoyo api ruddha
तद्वन्न रिक्तमतयो यतयोऽपि रुद्धा
shroto ganashatam aranam bhaja vasudevam
श्रोतो
गणस्तमरणं भज
वासुदेवम्
That's so nice, Nitai Kurmani Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's decide. So this verse is actually telling about pure bhakti, and Sanat Kumar is now discussing this with Prithu Maharaj. So yat pada pankaja palasa vilasa bhaktya. So then it says yat pada pankaja palasha. talking about the lotus feet of the Lord. Pada Pankaja, lotus feet. Palasha is the petals, or we can say the toes of the Lord. Vilasa Bhakti. So one who gets enjoyment by bhakti of what? Of Yat Pada Pankaja Palasha, lotus feet of the Lord. What happens to them? To those santas? Karma Shayam Grathitam Udgrathayanti. All the fruitive activities, Grathitam not can be said not, Udgrathayanti. And everything comes out, uprooted all the way. So whatever is there, the karma and desires, fruitive activities and everything, that is totally udgrathayan, totally uprooted. Tadvan riktamatayo yatayo piruddha. So, but what happens to them who have riktamati? Riktamati means one who has no devotional service. They have mind in jnana or karma, these kind of activities. So what happens? They cannot stop what? Stota ganastamaranam. The waves of sense enjoyment which is coming towards them, they cannot stop it. Because they don't have the mercy of the lotus feet of the Lord, or they have not taken the practice of bhakti. So to everyone, the instruction is by bhakti, bhajava sudeva, to chant, to hear the glories of Vasudeva, Lord Shri Krishna. By that only, karma shayam grathitam mudgathayam. Totally the sensual, the fruitive activities, the waves of sense enjoyment can be deep, which is deeply rooted within us, can be uprooted, totally uprooted. So it gives a kind of very great hope that is there, and gives a message. Then what we have to do with the bhakti, with bhaktya, bhajavaasudevam, we should take the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, take the shelter of the devotees of the Lord, and always chant and hear the glories of the Lord. So before reading the translation, I'll read what Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur has to say for this verse, and then we can read the translation. So Vishnu Chakravarti says that Jnana Mishra Bhakti, having predominance of Bhakti, culminating in Shantarati, was explained starting from verse 22. Verse 37 and 38 explain Bhakti Mishra Jnana with predominance of Jnana, with the goal of Sayujya Mukti or merging. Understanding Prithu's distaste of words, know that Lord I am He, mentioned in verse 37, since he had pure bhakti in the mood of the servant and nothing else, Sanat Kumar now speak of pure bhakti by which one achieves prema, in which liberation is secondary effect. Liberation is secondary. Imagine. Moksha is the ultimate goal, but now it is a secondary effect. Bhakti is very predominant, means where the liberation lies when there is bhakti. Bilomangal Thakur says in his, there is in one of his prayers that like for the devotees, mukti is actually there standing in the line to ask for benediction. So Mukutanjali, he says. So here he's saying he glorifies that bhakti is the best process in two verses. Palasha petal refers to Lord's toes in this verse. Vilasa means distinctive sport or movement with distinction, visheshena lasa. In other words, beauty increasing at every moment. Thus the phrase means by bhakti to Lord's lotus toes, whose beauty increases at every moment, bhakti has two forms, sadhana, practice, and sadhya, perfection. Karmashayam means ahankara filled with impressions of karma. This is tightly knotted or gathitam, that is equated with avidya. The hridaya granthi refers to the same. Or another meaning is by bhakti to Lord's toes, endowed with various astonishing skills or vilasa, such as massaging, putting perfumes on Lord's body, bathing him and dressing his hair. Or it can mean by remembrance of the beauty of Lord's toes. Please worship Vasudeva the center. The Vaishnavas, Santa, untie the knot of ahankara filled with impressions of karma, tied tightly by the jiva's previous actions by now performing actions to the Lord, which have the opposite effect. By the process of bhakti, progressing from sadhana to sadhya, which is offered to his lotus petal toes, whose beauty increases at every moment. Ascetics or adaya, yataya Cannot do the same. Why? Their minds are without objects of thought. Riktamataya. They are without intelligence. Like persons without wealth. They are without intelligence. Contemplative person. Asanta. Shantas. Santas. That is commendable persons, on the other hand, have their mind concentrated on the Lord. They are very intelligent and happy. Aranam means shelter. Worship of son of Vasudeva Krishna, Aranam, can also mean without battle. If you do not surrender, then you will have to battle the senses and you will be defeated. So that's how Vishwanath Chakravarti is. Let's see the translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
The devotees who are always engaged in the service of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord can very easily overcome hard-knotted desires for fruitive activities. Because this is very difficult, the non-devotees, the jnanis and yogis, although trying to stop the waves of sense gratification, cannot do so. Therefore, you are advised to engage in the devotional service of Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. Hare Krishna.
Prabhupada beautifully puts here that can very easily overcome these hard-knotted desires are very difficult to do. It's very difficult, but one can easily overcome. But this is very difficult, he says. Although trying to stop the waves cannot do so, they cannot even do so. Not only difficult, but it is impossible. Cannot do so. So therefore, you are advised, Prithvi Maharaj is advised to engage in devotional service of Krishna. Let's read the purport.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
There are three kinds of transcendentalists trying to overcome the influence of the modes of material nature: the Jnanis, Yogis, and Bhaktas. All of them attempt to overcome the influence of the senses, which is compared to the incessant waves of a river. The waves of a river flow incessantly, and it is very difficult to stop them. Similarly, the waves of desire for material enjoyment are so strong that they cannot be stopped by any process other than Bhakti Yoga. The Bhaktas, by their transcendental devotional service unto the lotus feet of the Lord, become so overwhelmed with transcendental bliss that automatically their desires for material enjoyment stop. The Jnanis and Yogis who are not attached to the lotus feet of the Lord simply struggle against the waves of desire. They are described in this verse as Rikta Matayah, which means devoid of devotional service. In other words, the Jnanis and Yogis, although trying to be free from the desires of material activities, actually become more and more entangled in false philosophical speculation or strenuous attempts to stop the activities of the senses. As stated previously, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitah Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayat Ahetukam. Prabhu, should I stop or continue?
Let me see how long it is. Yeah, you can read the translation of this and then somebody else can.
Here also the same point is stressed. Bhaja Vasudevam indicates that one who is engaged in the loving service of Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, can very easily stop the waves of desires. As long as one continues to try to artificially stop the waves of desires, he will certainly be defeated. That is indicated in this verse.
Somebody can continue from here.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Desires for fruitive activities are strongly rooted, but the trees of desire can be uprooted completely by devotional service, because devotional service employs superior desire. One can give up inferior desires when engaged in superior desires. To try to stop desires is impossible. One has to desire the supreme in order not to be entangled in inferior desires. Jnanis maintain a desire to become one with the Supreme, but such desires is also considered to be kama, lust. Similarly, the yogis desire mystic power, and that is also kama. And the bhaktas, not being desirous of any sort of material enjoyment, become purified. There is no artificial attempt to stop desire. Desire becomes a source of spiritual enjoyment under the protection of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord. It is stated here in by the Kumaras that the lotus feet of Lord Krishna are the ultimate reservoir of all pleasure. One should therefore take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord instead of trying unsuccessfully to stop desires for material enjoyment. As long as one is unable to stop the desire for material enjoyment, there is no possibility of becoming liberated from the entanglement of material existence. It may be argued that the waves of the river of a river are incessantly flowing and that they cannot be stopped. But the waves of the river flow towards the sea. When the tide comes over the river, it overwhelms the flowing of the river, and the river itself becomes overflowed. Then the waves from the sea become more prominent than the waves from the river. Similarly, a devotee with intelligence plans so many things for the service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness that stagnant material desires become overflooded by the desire to serve the Lord, as confirmed by Yamunacharya. Since he has been engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, there is always a current of newer and newer desires flowing to serve the Lord. So much so that the stagnant desire of sex life becomes very insignificant. Yamunacharya even says that he spits on such desires. Bhagavad Gita 2.59 also confirms Param Dustva Nivartrate. The conclusion is that by developing a loving desire for the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, we subdue all material desire for sense gratification. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
So Srila Prabhupada starts the purport here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. We're talking about three kinds of transcendentalists, and we have discussed this in other previous verses also, the Jnanis, the Yogis, and the Bhaktas. One thing Srila Prabhupada says, all of them attempt to overcome the influence of the senses. Everybody is trying to do that. Why? Because this is very incessant flow of river. So as we can see here, Shrota Ganastam, Shrota Gana. So from the stotra it is coming, the incessant flow is coming. Ruddha is to stop. So everybody tries to do that, but very difficult, because flowing river, to stop flowing river is quite difficult. One has, even if one doesn't have experience, you might have seen, and by seeing one can understand that happens. So here it says that material enjoyment are so strong that they cannot be stopped by any process other than bhakti yoga. How bhakti yoga is helpful? By the transcendental devotional service on the lotus feet of the Lord becomes so overwhelmed with transcendental bliss that automatically the desires are for a material enjoyment stop. So now you can see this example beautifully. This statement is beautifully described down here when Srila Prabhupada describes that river goes very overflowingly, but when it reaches the sea, river waves are also there. But when the sea waves come, it takes over the river waves, and then it can be controlled. That's how it is. Now we can understand the sea is the devotional service, and the rivers are our material desires. So when we take shelter of the sea or the devotional service, those waves will overpower the other waves and that will neutralize it. That's how it works. Any other, by jnana or by karma or by yoga, it's very difficult to do. So that Srila Prabhupada here says that the jnanis and yogis who are not attached to the lotus feet of the Lord simply struggle. It is simple. There is a struggle. There is no other way. And as you can see in here, it says cannot do so. It's impossible to be done. So then here, a previous verse from Bhagavatam is Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita. Bhagavati Bhakti. So one who is whose mind is always thinking about bhakti for Supreme Lord Vasudeva, and he is engaged in devotional service. Janayati Ashu Vairagyam. So that Vairagya automatically comes. Jnanam cha yad ahaitukam. And also the Gyan of ahaituki. Ahaituki means without any hetu or without any reason. That desire comes to serve the lotus feet of the Lord. And all other desires are subdued. So now here, Srila Prabhupada says, Bhaja Vasudevam also indicates the same thing. Can very easily stop the waves of desires. As long as one continues to try artificially stop the waves of desires, he will certainly be defeated. And we saw Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also saying that, and Srila Prabhupada here repeating it. One thing very important here, that how Jnanis, when they want to desire to become one with Supreme, that is called Kama. Yogis desire mystic thing, that is also a desire. So they are always having some kind of desire, which is material desire, not a very spiritual desire. And this kind of, then we have to understand, become one with the Supreme is also one's egoistic desire to have similar opulence or similar thing as the Lord himself. So that's why it is called as karma, or a desire, or a material kind of desire. That's why it also comes in the category of lust. So that's why they cannot go beyond it to get the mercy of the Lord. But what happens to bhaktas, not being desire of any sort of material enjoyment, they become purified because they are not desirous of anything. And their desire is what? They want to serve the Supreme Lord and have a complete source of enjoyment under the protection of the, because there is no way we can be desireless. We would have desires, and it has to be purified, as in Bhagavad Gita Krishna says, Param Drishtva Nivartate. When we have superior desires, those inferior desires are kept down, and the superior desire overpower. And because they overpower, they would allow us to progress steadily in the path where we want to go. In this case, the supreme abode, to get to the supreme destination of the Lord, going back to Godhead by serving his lotus feet. So here, that's why Srila Prabhupada says, as long as one is unable to stop the desire of material enjoyment, there is no possibility of becoming liberated from the entanglement of the material existence. And then how he ends, the conclusion is that by developing a loving desire, saying what desire, so that desire, now the desire we have for material activities, now we have to develop a loving desire for serving the lotus feet of the Lord. We will serve you by that loving desire, but with that desire only, it will subdue all the material desires for self-gratification. Doesn't mean that we would be freed in one day, but gradually it will actually take away all that. Hridaya Granthi would be totally opened up. That knots would be all taken care of, and it will be all like when you have knots in a rope or in a thread, it's so difficult to maneuver. But when there are no knots, very easy. So our heart becomes free of those knots, and we can purify ourselves by what? By developing a loving desire for the service of the lotus feet of the Lord. So that's the message. So the main message is Bhaktya Bhaja Vasudevam. So I'll pause here, and any reflections? This is a beautiful verse, very enlivening verse. Every verse is enlivening, but this is like that. Okay. So please say any reflections, questions, corrections. They are welcome. Thank you.